The road to Velmoor crossed the Ashfin Moor in a single long diagonal that took most of a day to walk, and Kassia had been advised, by 3 separate people in the last town, not to walk it alone after dark. She was walking it alone. It was getting dark. This was not carelessness. Kassia Thorneld had been traveling the roads of the northern reaches for 6 years, long enough to have developed a working relationship with risk that was less about avoiding it and more about knowing which risks were negotiable. The Ashfin after dark was by local reputation the habitat of willow-wisps, bog haunts, and the occasional territorial marsh spirit with an aggressive property line. She had faced worse. She had, on 2 memorable occasions in her earlier years, faced considerably worse and emerged from both with her skin intact and her pack lighter, which was the standard outcome of encounters with things that wanted something from you. You gave up something smaller than what they actually wanted and kept moving. She was a tiefling, which meant she had spent her entire life being the thing that made people nervous in rooms, the presence that caused conversations to quiet and eyes to track sideways. Her skin was the deep burgundy of old wine. Her horns curved back from her temples in the smooth arc of something that had grown with her since birth, their surface the matte charcoal of weathered stone. Her eyes were gold, not the warm gold of firelight but the flat, reflective gold of a cat's eye in the dark, which had the unfortunate property of catching lamplight in a way that made people in taverns grip their cups more tightly and watch the door. She was accustomed to being watched. She was accustomed to being the thing people told their children stories about, not the hero of those stories, generally, but the warning in them. She had, over 31 years of existence, developed a comprehensive set of opinions about this, most of which she kept to herself on the grounds that expressing them tended to confirm whatever the other person had already decided about her. The moor at dusk was honest in a way that towns rarely were. The heather was simply heather, purple-gray, in the failing light. The bog pools reflected the sky without editorializing. The wind moved through the sedge grass with the clean indifference of something that had no opinion about tieflings or anything else. Kassia had always moved more easily through wild country than through settled places, which said something about the relative judgment of nature versus civilization that she found clarifying rather than sad. She was 2 miles from the moor's far edge and the road's descent toward Velmoor when the fog came in. Ashfin fog was local knowledge. It came off the bog pools in the hour after sunset, thick and fast and completely indifferent to the road beneath it. Within 10 minutes, the road had become a suggestion rather than a certainty, visible as a slightly firmer feeling underfoot when she stepped correctly and entirely invisible when she didn't. The sky above was gone. The heather on either side was gone. She had her pack, her boots, the 40-foot radius of slightly denser gray that the fog allowed her, and the distant sound of something that she identified, after a moment's attention, as water. She stopped. She oriented toward the sound. She did not follow it because water sounds in fog on a moor after dark were precisely the kind of navigational information that turned out, in retrospect, to have been provided by something that wanted you somewhere specific. "Smart," said a voice, from approximately the direction of nowhere in particular. Kassia did not reach for her blade. She had learned over 6 years that reaching for a blade in situations like this one communicated a set of things about your state of mind that were rarely to your advantage. Instead, she stood still, oriented toward the voice, and waited. The fog moved. Not the way fog moved when wind pushed it, deliberately, with the specific quality of something that was moving because it chose to move rather than because physics required it. It gathered itself in the middle of the road ahead of her into a shape that was not quite a figure, and not quite a column, and not quite anything she had a precise word for, only the accumulated impression of presence organized into verticality. "You know better than to follow water sounds?" the shape said. Its voice had the layered quality of sound moving through wet air, slightly blurred at the edges, the consonants soft, the vowels resonant in a way that felt less like hearing and more like the vibration reaching her chest before her ears. "Most travelers don't. Most travelers," Kassia said, "haven't spent 6 years on roads." "No," the shape agreed. "They haven't." It paused, the quality of which she was already cataloging, not the pause of something that had run out of things to say, but the pause of something that was considering how to say what it had already decided to say. "You have something that belongs to me, Kassia Thorneld. I've been waiting for you to come through my road." The fog pressed closer. The water sounds continued from their original direction, which was now somewhere to her left. "I've never been on this road before," she said. "No," the shape said, "but your grandfather was. And he made a bargain he didn't keep." Which means the shape moved slightly, in a way that reorganized its outlines without making them more distinct. "The debt comes to you." Kassia had heard variations of this before. She had, in fact, heard it twice. Once from a debt collector in Arnhem who was using the claim as leverage and had no legal basis for it, and once from a river spirit in the south that had turned out to be entirely genuine and had required careful negotiation and the surrender of a silver ring she had been given at 15 and was not sorry to have kept as long as she had. She could not tell yet which kind of claim this was. The fog said nothing helpful. The road under her feet said nothing at all. "Tell me about the bargain," she said. The spirit's name, as it offered it, was Morthis, a name with the texture of old peat and the cadence of something that had been spoken in this moor for longer than the roads across it had existed. It had the form it had because form was a convenience rather than a nature. What it actually was, it communicated through the specifics of how the fog moved around it and the particular quality of cold that radiated from its presence, which was not the cold of temperature, but the cold of depth, the sensation of standing at the edge of something that went down a very long way. It told her the story with the smooth fluency of something that had been rehearsing it, which was itself information. 38 years ago, a man named Kassia Thorneld had crossed the Ashfin Moor in a desperate situation. He was a merchant, once prosperous, currently ruined by a business partner's fraud and a creditor's claim on everything he owned. He was carrying his last assets, a sealed contract, a family seal ring, and the proceeds of a quietly conducted sale of his wife's jewelry, which she did not know about and which he intended to replace before she noticed. He was crossing the moor because the road through it was toll-free, unlike the river road, and he could not afford the toll. Morthis had appeared in the fog, as it had appeared to Kassia, with the same offer it made to travelers in desperate circumstances, safe passage and a reversal of fortunes, in exchange for a soul debt redeemable at the spirit's choosing. Kassia Thorneld had accepted. He recovered his business, Morthis said, in the tone of someone recounting a transaction. The partner's fraud was exposed. The creditor's claim was invalidated on a technicality. His wife never found out about the jewelry. A pause. He lived well for 23 more years and died in his bed. And the debt? He refused collection 3 times. Each time I came to him, he had a reason. His wife was ill, his daughter was young, his son had just married. There was always something. The fog moved, and the quality of the movement was not anger, but something colder, the patience of something that had simply waited and kept waiting. He died before I could collect. Which means, under the terms of the original bargain, the debt transfers to the next of his blood to cross my road. His granddaughter, Kassia said. His granddaughter, Morthis confirmed. Kassia had known Kassia Thorneld for exactly 4 years of her life, from age 3 to age 7. When he had died in the bed, Morthis described with the peaceful composure of a man who had either made his peace with the universe, or had been very successfully not thinking about something very large for 23 years. She remembered him as a large presence with kind hands and the specific smell of pipe tobacco and spiced wine. She did not remember him as someone who had sold the security of his soul to a moor spirit and then dodged the bill for 2 decades. She was doing the things she did in negotiations, collecting information, assessing the other party's position, looking for the variables that were not yet visible. Morthis was smooth. Morthis was very smooth. The story was delivered with the precision of something constructed to be both true and persuasive, which was not the same as something that was simply true. The terms of the original bargain, she said. You said soul debt redeemable at the spirit's choosing. What does collection actually mean? Your soul, Morthis said. Collected, here, on this road. To what end? A pause. That is the spirit's own business. It is, Kassia agreed. And the manner of collection? The original terms, were they documented? The fog shifted. A small shift, barely perceptible, but she caught it. The particular quality of something recalibrating. Oral agreement, Morthis said. As was standard. As was standard, she repeated. Under what framework? The old spirit compact tradition? The Ashfin regional custom? The Velmoor charter precedents? She kept her voice level and professional. because she had learned that nothing unsettled a party accustomed to dealing with panicked or desperate counterparts, quite like someone who was treating the situation as a business matter. The transfer clause is the relevant point. Soul debt transfer to blood descendants. That's a specific provision, and its terms vary considerably depending on the original compact framework. The debt is valid, Morthis said. And there was the first crack. So small she might have missed it if she hadn't been watching. The assertion was too quick, too flat, the verbal equivalent of a door closed slightly harder than necessary. I'm not contesting validity, Kassia said carefully. I'm asking about terms. Specifically, whether the transfer clause in your compact with my grandfather included conditions. Most soul debt transfer provisions are conditional. The transferred debt is only binding if the descendant had knowledge of the original bargain, or if the original debtor's estate benefited the descendant, or if the descendant willingly crossed the spirit's territory with knowledge of the claim. She looked at the shape in the fog with her gold eyes that never quite stopped catching the light. I had no knowledge of this bargain. I received nothing from my grandfather's estate. He left it to my uncle, who was his legitimate son, and I was his daughter's child, and his daughter had left the family before I was born, and the estate settlement did not include me. A pause. And I did not cross this road with knowledge of your claim. The fog was very still. You are a tiefling, Morthis said, and the shift in register was subtle but real, from the smooth delivery of a rehearsed account to something with an edge in it. You have infernal blood. You know what debts are? Yes, Kassia said. I do, that's why I'm asking about the terms. The fog did not lift. It pressed, if anything, closer, and the temperature dropped, not in the ordinary way of night descending on open country, but in the targeted way of something applying pressure to a specific point. Kassia's breath came out in visible clouds. The road beneath her feet felt less certain than it had, which was not a physical change but a perceptual one, a kind of subtle environmental manipulation that spirits of this class used to destabilize a counterpart's sense of their own footing, literal and figurative. She had studied this, not academically, experientially, from 6 years of roads and the things that lived on them and near them, from 2 significant spirit encounters and a dozen minor ones, from an old ranger named Sable who had spent 30 years crossing wild country, and had spent 2 winters teaching Kassia everything she knew about negotiating with the kinds of entities that most people avoided by simply not going where those entities lived. Sable had told her, the first thing a manipulative spirit does when challenged on its terms is shift the frame. It stops talking about the terms and starts talking about you. What you are. What you owe by nature rather than by agreement. Watch for the shift. That's when you know you've found the weak point. Morthis had shifted to the tiefling comment within seconds of her raising the transfer clause conditions. Let's talk about the terms, Kassia said, returning the conversation to where she wanted it with the firm patience of someone who had decided where this discussion was going and was not interested in detours. You said oral agreement. That means the terms are what each party understood them to be at the time of the bargain. What did my grandfather understand he was agreeing to? He understood he was pledging his soul. Did he understand the transfer clause? Did you explain to him, at the time of the bargain, that the debt would transfer to his blood descendants if he died before collection? The fog moved in a way that was not an answer. Because if he didn't understand that provision, Kassia said, it wasn't part of the agreement he made. It was a term you're applying retroactively, which would make it not a debt at all, but a claim. And a claim is a different thing, with different conditions and considerably less force. Your grandfather, Morthis said. And now the smooth delivery was gone entirely, replaced by something with a colder quality. Not anger, not quite, but the register of something that had been patient for a very long time and was finding that patience tested in a direction it had not anticipated. Was a coward who ate my gift and refused payment for 23 years. The debt is real. The debt between you and him may well have been real, Kassia said. That's not what I'm contesting. I'm contesting whether it's mine. She held the pale gold eyes, or rather, held the place in the fog where eyes would have been if this entity had committed to a more specific form with the steadiness that she had cultivated over 31 years of being looked at in ways that were meant to make her feel less than she was. My grandfather made choices. He made a bargain he didn't keep. That's his account. I had no part in it and no benefit from it. His cowardice, if that's what it was, is not my inheritance. The fog contracted. The quality of the cold changed, and this was where Kassia felt, for the first time in the conversation, the specific sensation of genuine danger. Not the managed risk of a negotiation with a weak position on the other side. The real thing. Morthis was old. Morthis had weight and presence, and the particular authority of something that had inhabited a piece of land for centuries and had made many bargains and collected many debts. And whatever its legal position on the transfer clause, it had the practical power to make her night on this moor very difficult. She had one move left. She had been saving it. "I want to offer you something," she said. The fog stilled. The cold held, neither advancing nor retreating. "Not my soul," she added, because clarity was important. "A different payment. For the original debt, not the transfer debt, which I don't concede, but the debt my grandfather owed you and didn't pay. I am willing to address that debt. Not because I owe it. Because I choose to." "Why," Morthis said slowly, "would you pay a debt that is not yours?" "Because he was my grandfather," Kassia said. "And because the debt was real, even if the transfer isn't. And because I've spent 31 years carrying the weight of things. I didn't do and didn't choose, and I know what it is to have a legitimate grievance ignored for a long time." She held the stillness of the fog and spoke directly into it. "I'm not paying because you frightened me into it. I'm not paying because I accept your claim on me. I'm paying because it's the right thing to do. And those are very different things, and you know the difference. Or you wouldn't have been able to hold a soul compact for 38 years. The fog held for a long moment. Then Morthis said, "What do you offer?" And for the first time in the conversation, the voice had lost its rehearsed smoothness entirely. And what was underneath it was something Kassia had not expected. Something that all the manipulation and the pressure, and the careful frame shifting had been constructed on top of. Something old and tired, and she realized with the clarity of genuine surprise, the legitimate grievance was real. Her grandfather's debt was real. And Morthis had been holding it for 38 years with the specific, wearing patience of something that knew it had been wronged and had no recourse but to wait. She offered 3 things, because 3 was the number that spirit compacts of this class recognized as a complete payment. Not by rule exactly, but by the deep structural logic of old agreements, which had their own grammar the way languages had grammar. The first was acknowledgement. She said, aloud and with the formal register that made spoken things binding in spirit compact tradition, that Kassia Thorneld of the Thorneld line had made a bargain with Morthis of the Ashfin Moor, had accepted the terms and benefited from them, and had refused collection 3 times over 23 years and died in default of his obligation. She said it completely, without mitigation, because the truth of it did not require her defense of him and her grandfather, had not deserved her defense on this particular point. The second was restitution. She had, in her pack, the proceeds of 6 weeks' work in the last 3 towns, ward work, mostly. The repair and renewal of household protection enchantments, the kind of steady practical magic that kept a traveler in food, and lodgings across the long haul of the road. She had 42 silver and a small commission note payable on arrival in Velmore. She laid the 42 silver on the road in the form that spirit compact tradition specified for material restitution, a circle, not a pile, each coin placed individually. It was not, she estimated, the monetary equivalent of what her grandfather's restored fortune had been worth. It was what she had. She said so, in the same formal register, without apology. The third was witness. She had a journal. She had been keeping it for 6 years, recording the roads and the things she encountered on them and the negotiations and their outcomes, a practical record, not a sentimental one, maintained because memory was unreliable over long distances, and the details that seemed obvious in the moment were the ones that saved you when a similar situation arose 2 years later. She opened it to a new page and wrote, by the light of the small cantrip flame she carried for exactly this kind of darkness, the account of the bargain and the debt and the refusals and the 38-year wait, and she dated it and signed it, and said, formally, that this record existed and would continue to exist, and that Morthis of the Ashfin Moor had held a legitimate debt and been wronged by its non-payment. The fog was very still through all of this. When she finished, she closed the journal and looked at the place where the shape had been. The cold had not lifted, but it had changed quality again, from the pressing cold of applied force to the ambient cold of a moor at night, which was simply what it was and not a statement about anything. The debt, Morthis said, after a long silence. The voice was quieter. Not smaller, quieter, the way a room was quieter after something that had been filling it at high volume stopped. Is not satisfied. What you've offered doesn't balance it. No, Kassia agreed. It doesn't. 42 silver and a journal entry don't balance. 23 years of waiting and a legitimate claim refused 3 times. I know that. She held the fog's attention. But they're what I have and they're offered honestly, which is more than my grandfather offered. And the acknowledgement and the witness are worth something that money isn't. Which is why I offered them alongside the silver rather than instead of it. Another long silence. You said you carry weight of things you didn't do, Morthis said. What things? Kassia had not expected this question. She was quiet for a moment, not deflecting but genuinely taking the question seriously, because she had learned that the questions spirits asked were rarely without purpose, and the purpose was rarely what it appeared to be. I'm a tiefling, she said, finally. My great-grandmother made a bargain that put infernal blood in the family line. She's been dead for 100 years. Every room I walk into, I carry what she did. People see my horns and my eyes, and they've already decided what I am before I say a word. She kept her voice level. Because this was not a bid for sympathy, she was answering a question, honestly. As she had been answering questions throughout this conversation. I don't owe that debt. I didn't make that bargain. But I carry the consequences of it every day. And there's no negotiating my way out of it because there's no counterpart to negotiate with. It just is, the fog moved. And for the first time since the beginning of this encounter, the movement had no pressure in it. No manipulation, no applied force, no careful repositioning. It was simply movement, the way the sedge grass moved when the wind came through. You understand, Morthis said, what it is to have a legitimate claim that cannot be collected. Yes, Kassia said. I do. The silence that followed had the quality of 2 things that had been in opposition finding. Not agreement exactly, but a common ground that neither had been looking for and both had arrived at anyway. Your grandfather's debt, Morthis said, at last, is not closed. What you've offered reduces it. It does not close it. The fog shifted, and the shape within it began to lose its verticality, to spread and thin into the ordinary moor fog that had no direction or intention. But you are not your grandfather. And the claim is against him, not against you. I withdrew it. Tonight, Kassia repeated carefully. Or permanently? A pause that was almost, in its texture, something like the first genuine humor the conversation had contained. Permanently, Morthis said. You've made it complicated to maintain. The fog did not lift dramatically. It thinned, gradually, the way fog thinned when the temperature began to equalize, slowly, without ceremony, becoming less of itself until the road was visible again, and the heather on either side, and the far edge of the moor, and the lights of Velmore on the descent beyond. The water sounds to her left were still there, but they were simply the sound of water now, without direction or intent. Kassia stood on the road for a moment before she started walking again. She looked at the place where the fog had been thickest and said, quietly but clearly and in the same formal register she had used throughout, "Thank you for hearing the offer." There was no response. There was only the moor and the night, and the road beneath her feet leading toward the lights of the city, and somewhere in the ambient dark the faint resonance of something old and tired that had, for one evening on one road, been addressed honestly by someone who had no obligation to do so and had chosen to anyway. She reached Velmore 2 hours later. She paid for a room at the second inn she tried. The first had been full, or so the innkeeper said, though she had noticed the way his eyes tracked to her horns before he said it. And she ate the meal she had been thinking about since midday, and drank 1 cup of wine and opened her journal. She read what she had written in the fog. She added 3 lines below it, the withdrawal of the claim, the condition of it, and a note that read for her own future reference. Because this was a practical document, spirit was legitimate. Grievance was real. Manipulation was the shell around the grievance, not the core of it. Look for the shell and the core separately. Then she closed the journal, set it beside the candle, and slept, dreamlessly, until morning. She crossed the Ashfin Moor again the following spring, because Velmore had become a semi-regular stop on her circuit and the Ashfin Road was the most direct approach. She crossed it in daylight, which was the sensible approach, though she had also crossed it at dusk on the return journey the previous autumn and found it entirely unremarkable. Fog, heather, the sound of water from the bog pools, and nothing. That was not what it appeared to be. She had told the story twice in the intervening year. Once to another traveler she had met on a road south of the moor, who had the look of someone heading toward the Ashfin crossing for the first time, and the expression of someone who had been told not to walk it after dark, and was weighing this advice against their timeline. She told it without embellishment: the fog, the claim, the negotiation, the three-part offer, the outcome. The traveler listened with the focused attention of someone filing information they intended to use, which was the correct response, and asked two questions that were both practical and good. The second time was in a letter to her mother, who lived in the city of Arndale, and whom Kassia wrote to with the irregular frequency of someone who had complicated feelings about family and had decided, somewhere in her late 20s, that complicated feelings were not a reason to stop writing. She had told her mother about Kassia Thorneld's bargain, about what he had done and what he had not done and what it had cost. Not her. But the thing on the other side of the agreement, which had waited 38 years to collect a debt from a man who kept finding reasons not to pay it. Her mother had written back, after a longer gap than usual, a letter that said, "I knew he was carrying something. I didn't know what. I don't know if it would have changed anything. I think it's right that you addressed it, even though you didn't have to." Kassia had read this letter 3 times and then filed it in the journal. In the section of pressed pages she used for things she wanted to keep, but not necessarily look at often. On the spring crossing, she stopped at the midpoint of the moor, the place on the road where the heather pressed closest on either side and the bog pools were most visible, where the fog would have been thickest on that autumn evening. It was noon. The sky was clear and bright. There was no fog, there was no cold. There was nothing that was not exactly what it appeared to be. She set a single silver coin on the road. Not in a circle, just placed, with the same formality she brought to the things that mattered, which was the formality of intention rather than ceremony. She said, quietly, that she was passing through again, and that she had not forgotten the accounting. The heather moved in the wind. The bog pools reflected the sky. She picked up the coin because leaving silver on a road was an invitation to complications she didn't need, and kept walking. But she had said it because saying it mattered. Because the things you acknowledged out loud were different from the things you only knew privately, and because she had spent enough years carrying other people's consequences to understand, with some precision, the weight of being neither seen nor acknowledged. The road descended from the moor toward Velmoor. The spring light was warm on her burgundy skin. Her horns cast short shadows in the midday sun. She had 43 silver this year, which was 1 more than last autumn, and a commission note payable in the city, and a journal with 62 more pages of roads and encounters and practical notes about the things that lived on them. She was, as she had been for 31 years, the thing that made people nervous in rooms. She was also, as she had been for 6 years of roads, the person who knew how to address a legitimate grievance honestly, even when she had no obligation to do so. These were not contradictions. They were simply both true, which was, she had found, the condition of most things worth knowing about. The city lights were visible on the descent. She walked toward them in the bright spring afternoon, alone on the road as she usually was, which was the thing she had chosen and continued to choose, and which suited her considerably better than the alternatives. O destino desta historia, esta nas suas mas. Se voca acredita que o heroi não esta sozinho, dic su like. Se voca vaio o que os outros não viram, escreva sua teoria nas comentários. E se voca precisa saber o que acontece a seguir, inscreva-se. O próximo capítulo vai mudar tudo.